Today we're out here with Volvo's entry in the extremely competitive compact luxury sedan segment, the 2020 S60. In case you're wondering, this doesn't just look like a scaled down version of the S90, this really is a mini-me version of Volvo's large sedan. We get the same engines under the hood, this rides on the same platform overall, and many of the same features and styling cues are driven right down to this S60. Going in for a closer look, you'll notice that not all the shapes are the same as the S90 and the rest of the Volvo product line, but the family resemblance is still incredibly strong. We have the Thor's hammer headlamp design that we've seen in a lot of Volvo models out there. These are full LEDs, and these are the up-level ones that do steer in the corners. We don't have any fog lights down below because we are driving the T8 version, and for some reason the T8 model is incompatible with fog lamps. We're told that some of the space on either side of the bumper is used for some of those hybrid system components. Volvo has a well-deserved reputation for being a company that is not just focused on safety, they're obsessed with safety. And Volvo has a long history of innovation when it comes to active safety gadgets, gizmos, passive safety systems, active safety systems, etc. So I do find it a little bit surprising that even in their newest vehicle, like the S60, we don't get all of those active safety technologies standard. That means that features that we have on this model, like the radar adaptive cruise control and Volvo's semi-autonomous driving system, are definitely optional. When we take a look at the front, the 360-degree camera system is also optional right there in that Volvo logo. But you notice the Volvo logo looks a little bit more 3D than we see in some other cars out there. That's because you won't find the radar sensor up front. You'll actually find it right there behind the windshield, right there with the forward-looking camera system. By placing the radar sensor up front, it's less likely to be damaged by objects going down the road. It's also less likely to be affected by snow and other adverse weather conditions that can build up on a radar sensor on the front of the vehicle. That radar sensor is cleared by the windshield wipers, so as long as you can see out of the vehicle, the radar sensor can see out of the vehicle as well. And if for some reason you were driving down a Finnish highway and you wanted to put a ton of different lights on the front of your Volvo, then this would completely support that because they're not going to be interfering with that sensor. Previous generations of Volvo's compact luxury sedans were definitely on the compact end of the compact luxury category, but that's not true for this generation anymore. It grew significantly over the last model, about 5 inches overall, putting this right in the thick of things for the luxury compact segment. Now, it is worth noting that compact luxury sedan is an awful lot less compact than it used to be. This is about the same size overall as a mid-size family sedan from about 20 years ago in America. The elegant styling continues around the rear, nothing overstyled or fussy going on back here. These are full LED tail lamp modules that wrap from the trunk lid on down there around. But for some reason in North America, we don't get amber turn signals like the rest of the Volvo lineup. Volvo tells us that this was purely a styling decision. They think American luxury buyers are interested in red turn signals. I prefer amber. Let me know what you think about that down there in the comment section. Down here at the bottom of the bumper, we find something that we don't see in modern Audis, which are real dual exhaust tips, so exhaust gas actually flows out of these openings. The long hood proportions and the overall power figures of the S60, ranging from 250 horsepower to 415 horsepower, are very similar to the German options in this segment. But the way that Volvo gets there is very, very different. The first thing you'll notice is that all S60 models have a 2-liter 4-cylinder engine under the hood, including that 415 horsepower model. The other thing you'll notice is that the engine is sitting transversely across the engine bay, not longitudinally like we find in a rear-wheel drive vehicle. That gives Volvo certain packaging efficiencies, certain fuel economy efficiencies, and also some crash structure benefits as well. The other main benefit is plug-in hybrid packaging. You'll notice when you take a look at some of the German competition's plug-in hybrids that the battery pack is way back there in the trunk. That reduces the cargo capacity and cargo practicality of the vehicle. With this drivetrain layout, however, Volvo doesn't have a drive shaft going to the rear. Instead, they can put the battery pack where the drive shaft would normally go. And that keeps that battery pack centered in the vehicle, right between the front wheels and the rear wheels, improving weight balance, improving weight distribution, etc. Volvo's also positioning their plug-in hybrids a little bit differently. This is the top-end engine option in the S60. In this model, it produces 400 horsepower, definitely very competitive with a lot of the high horsepower options from the competition. 316 horsepower comes from this turbocharged and supercharged 2-liter 4-cylinder engine. Yes, you heard that right, turbocharged and supercharged. The supercharger handles low RPM operation to give you instant torque. The turbocharger takes over at higher operation to give you more efficient power, and then the plug-in hybrid system is sending more power to the rear than we'd find in competitive regular hybrids, and of course giving you just over 20 miles of real-world electric range. Also an interesting twist, this is the most efficient version of the S60. This particular model gets 31 miles per gallon combined after the battery has been exhausted. That is actually better than the 250 horsepower base model. Front seat comfort is excellent in the S60. One thing that I really appreciate about Volvo's latest models is that they're not reserving high-end features to just the higher-end models in their lineup. So you can get the S60 with their active massage feature in the front seats. We have power extending thigh cushion, available inflatable side bolsters, four-way adjustable lumbar support, etc. One oddity, however, is that we still don't have a powered tilt telescopic steering column. As we see in most European luxury vehicles, the front passenger seat has exactly the same range of motion as the driver's seat, including some of those upper end options. So if you get massaging seats, the front passenger seat has that massage functionality as well, and that's what easily gets the S60 10 out of 10 points when it comes to front seat comfort. Hopping into the back seat, we find significantly more legroom than we found in the previous generation S60. I have about 5 or 6 inches of legroom left. Even though on paper this appears to be pretty similar to the Mercedes-Benz C300, I actually think we have a little bit more usable room back here. This is very similar to what we see in the BMW 3 Series, which also has an enormous back seat. Unlike mainstream compact sedans, we also have a reasonable amount of headroom. I can very easily put my head right there on that headrest, and my hair is just barely brushing the ceiling. I still have about half an inch of headroom left. If I move over to the right side of the car, you'll notice that the front seat track does move quite far rearward. I had a taller person up front. He had absolutely no problem being comfortable up there at 6'5", but you can see that I have only about half an inch of legroom left. But you will notice the one downside to the plug-in hybrid model that we're driving here, and that is this bulky center console. In the T5 and T6 models, the center console is not quite as long, and it definitely doesn't have this enormous hump right back here. That's because of the positioning of the battery. The massive increase in rear legroom comes a little bit at the expense of trunk capacity. Back here we find 11.6 cubic feet of storage space, which is a little on the low side for a compact luxury sedan in America. And if we lift up this load floor, you'll notice that we don't have a spare tire under here. Part of the area is likely consumed by some of the electronics for the rear electric motor, the optional all-wheel drive system if you get the non-hybrid version, and of course Volvo's crash structures. You'll notice that we have a little bit more of a rear bumper back here than we find in some of the competition. And then of course there's trunk lid height. Volvo decided to give this more of a traditional sedan profile rather than trying to give it a very bulky rear end. The downside to that is of course cargo capacity. You will find more storage space in some of the German options. Hopping inside, this is the active safety module that I talked about earlier. You can see it's positioned right there behind the rear view mirror. We also have the SOS button and the on-call button for Volvo's telematics system. We have a slightly larger than normal dual pane moonroof, but you can see it's not quite a panoramic design. It doesn't go to just over the rear passengers' heads. It really just goes to just slightly behind the front seats. In quite a change for Volvo, we finally have height adjustable shoulder belts for the driver and front passenger, but the front headrests are still fixed into place. We've been driving the R design trim, which means that we have this combination Nappa leather and fabric front and rear seat design. It's a very attractive look, but it's only available here in the R design at the moment. I also have to admit that I'm a little bit more partial to Volvo's lighter interior colors. Let me know what you think about that down there in the comment section. We have pretty aggressive side bolstering for the seat back and seat bottom cushion. We also have the extending thigh cushion right there. You can see how that part moves forward. Moving over to the front doors, we find a decent portion of soft touch materials, including more of that fabric insert. And you can see the various different colors going on there, where we have more of a charcoal armrest, that fabric, and then the darker black upper sections. Real metal speaker grills right there. We also have real metal trim in the dashboard. Again, this is an area where I do prefer some of the more luxurious versions of the S60 where we have wood trim. The overall design is very, very similar to the S90, the XC90, and the S60, of course, but with a slightly different tweak for their smaller sedan here. In the center of the dashboard, we find the same infotainment system that we find in the rest of the 2020 Volvo lineup. The processor has been made significantly faster for this model year, so you notice that transitions between slides, while still not quite as smooth as some out there, are definitely smoother than they were before. As you're interacting with the system, things definitely have a snappier feel than back in 2016 when this system first launched. You see we have a wide variety of different features and functions in here, but one thing I've always found disappointing with this generation of system is that if I'm using CarPlay down here in this section, I cannot use the media and phone areas for something else, because those are just being used by CarPlay. So I can't, for instance, swipe across and get driver performance, fuel consumption, or something like that in one of those other displays. Those selectable options always take that lower section of the screen. Continuing down the dashboard, we find many of the same styling cues that we find in the rest of the Volvo lineup. For instance, this sort of minimalist control setup here, where we have our hazard lights, front and rear defoggers, track forward, backward buttons, volume knob right there with play and pause in the center, and then this is a button blank right over here. It's used in some other Volvo vehicles, but not this particular one. We have Volvo's toggle shifter right back here, which some people dislike. Personally, I think most shoppers will end up getting used to it. It's a double tap design, so we double tap backwards to get drive, double tap forwards from drive to get reverse. One tap brings us to neutral, either from drive or from reverse. Park is this button right here. There's an engine start-stop toggle, drive mode selector that affects a wide variety of different functions, including the adaptive suspension if you have it, electric parking brake, auto brake hold, 2 cup holders over here, but you'll notice my cell phone is kind of hanging out right there. And that's because if we move to the center console in the T8, because of the battery pack's position, there's not a lot of room there. We have 2 USB ports, a 12-volt power port, and a very tiny little slot right there. I'm not quite sure what you'd put in there because a cell phone certainly wouldn't fit. I suppose if you wanted to, you could put the vehicle's key right in there, and then you'd still be able to close that lid right on it. On the driver's side, we find a full LCD instrument cluster, but this is not as configurable as some of the clusters out there, especially some of the new Mercedes clusters. It does change a little bit based on the drive mode. So for instance, if I put this into pure mode, you'll see that we have the electric and gasoline graph. This is a way to visualize when the vehicle will turn on the gasoline engine. So you can apply throttle all the way up there until it hits this little mark. And then if you start going over that, it'll have to turn on the gasoline engine to give you that kind of power. The display can also give us a tachometer. We can go for a more of a minimalist view, the performance red tinged view there, or chrome rings around. In the middle of the display, we have a moving map display. We can also get media readouts or just have it show nothing if you'd prefer it to be blank, but that's essentially all that can be configured on this particular display. The steering wheel is a round 3-spoke design. We have an R-Design logo at the bottom, shift paddles on the back, down on the left, up over here on the right. On the left side of the wheel, we find the controls for the cruise control system. We have the adaptive system in this car, so we have distance buttons here, and we could toggle left to right to enable or disable the pilot assist semi-autonomous driving system or regular adaptive cruise control. On this side of the steering wheel, we have track forward, backward, volume up, down, and then you can also use those buttons in coordination with this button to control a small amount of features right there on that multifunction instrument cluster. Volvo has long marched to a different drummer. They've had performance products in the past, but they've always been a little bit different than the competition's performance product, and that continues for the T8 version of the S60. Now this is unquestionably quick. 400 horsepower, almost 500 pound-feet of torque, gets this model from 0 to 60 in 4.4 seconds, and there is a lot of shove from this drivetrain. We have 316 horsepower and a reasonable amount of torque coming from that turbocharged, supercharged engine, and then we have the relatively powerful electric motor in the rear. This kind of system has always intrigued me a bit because Volvo could very easily crank the dial up even further if they wanted. They could put a 200 horsepower motor in the rear, a 300 horsepower motor in the rear, and have something that's even more powerful. Perhaps we'll see that in upcoming versions. But for the moment, this model runs 0 to 60 in 4.4 seconds. That is almost exactly the same as a C43 or an M340i. Clearly, Volvo does not have an answer to the BMW M3 or a C63, but this is a direct competitor to that mid-level in performance. But the important thing to keep in mind about the T8 is that this is a 4,500 pound compact sedan. This actually weighs more than a BMW 740i all-wheel drive, and it's all thanks to this big battery pack right next to me. But the battery pack is essential for giving us not just the overall performance, but the feel that we get out of the S60. If I were to floor this, we do get initial thrust from that rear electric motor that makes it feel peppier than you would otherwise imagine. But the laws of physics must be obeyed, and you will notice the extra weight out on the road. This feels a little bit bigger, a little bit more grown up, a little bit heavier than something like the BMW 3 Series or the Mercedes C-Class. It still handles relatively well because of where the weight is centered in the vehicle, but the weight is still certainly there. You'll also notice that in the stopping distance, we have 235 with performance tires on this particular model, but we still stop from 60 miles an hour to 0 in 119 feet. Now that's a very respectable stopping distance, all things considered, but for a performance model, you will definitely stop shorter in something like the M340i or C43. Unfortunately, the laws of physics must be obeyed, and that's why I'm going to have to give handling for this model a B. We don't have the rear-wheel drive dynamics that we find in the competition's performance models, and of course we have that extra weight. So it's just not going to grip the road like some of those German alternatives, but it is still an awful lot of fun. In terms of overall hybrid system refinement, this hybrid system is one of the best on the market at the moment. We have a true 8-speed automatic transmission under the hood, and then we have an e-all-wheel drive axle in the rear that is definitely able to apply more power to the rear than we find in Toyota and Lexus e-all-wheel drive systems. And that's what gives the S60 kind of an unusual character. Depending on what you're doing with this vehicle, when you floor it, you get an awful lot of torque to the rear. So you can actually get a little bit of rear end kick out in slow speed situations, and simultaneously just a hint of torque steer now and then. This is really one of the only vehicles available in North America that will give you both of those feelings, sometimes possibly simultaneously while out on the road. This gravel road's a great place to explore the all-wheel drive system here, because this is an all-wheel drive system. It can send a little bit less than 90 horsepower to the rear axle, but a reasonable amount of torque. But this is where some of these drive modes come in. So for instance, if I click this drive mode selector and choose constant all-wheel drive, the vehicle is going to try and send as much power as possible to the rear axle up until the point where you're commanding about 160 to 170 total horsepower and a reasonable amount of torque. It can balance the power. And that means we don't really have too much slip going up this hill right there. Now, obviously, because we have much more power on the front axle than on the rear axle, even in this all-wheel drive mode, if I were to just floor it here, we get a reasonable amount of front slip, and then there is still some motion forward because we're getting that extra power sent to the rear. Overall, this all-wheel drive system is much more capable than the all-wheel drive system that we find in a number of Toyota and Lexus models, simply because of the battery pack and the ability of this system to send a great deal more power to the rear axle whenever it wants to. The model that we're driving is the R-Design version. This does not have the adaptive suspension, and it does have a firmer suspension design than we find in the rest of the X60 lineup. If you're comparing the T8 R-Design version to something like a BMW M3 or a C43 AMG, this is not quite as firm. This is a little bit more supple. But if you're comparing this to more of an average run-of-the-mill 3 Series or C-Class or Audi A4, then this is going to be a little bit firmer. So I'm a little bit torn on the overall ride score. I'm going to go ahead and give this a B-. In our cabin noise test at 50 miles an hour, we clocked 72 decibels in here, making this about 1 decibel louder than the last Mercedes that we tested. That's logically due to the tires that we have on this particular vehicle. I don't think these tires are terribly quiet. Now let's talk more about the hybrid system. When using this just as a hybrid, not plugging it in, over a week of mixed driving, we averaged 30.3 mpg. That's just about what the EPA says we should get in combined driving. Keep in mind, of course, that we're talking about a vehicle that goes 0 to 60 in 4.4 seconds, will stop in under 120 feet. So this is a significantly different vehicle than, for instance, a hybrid Lexus ES. Not to mention, of course, that we have the addition of all-wheel drive traction in this model. Because of the design of this hybrid system, regen braking has a nice linear feel to it. So if I engage the extended regen braking mode there, it'll have a nice linear feel to it, and if I push further on the brake pedal, we don't get those sort of transmission shift feels that we see in some of the competition. Because it can use the rear electric motor for regen, it doesn't have to send that power through the stepped automatic transmission and then downshift as you're regen braking like we see in some competitive hybrid systems out there. Volvo has packaged the S60 a little bit differently than some of the European competition. There are 4 main trim levels. We have the Momentum trim level, R-Design, Inscription, and then Polestar Engineered, which you can sort of think of as R-Design Plus. The T5 engine is the one that's standard in every trim except for the top-end Polestar Engineered trim, which gets the plug-in hybrid system standard. That plug-in hybrid system is available in the Inscription trim, the R-Design trim, and of course standard in that Polestar Engineered model. It is worth noting, however, that even though we have 400 horsepower available, all Volvos for 2020 are now going to be limited to 112 miles an hour maximum. This is part of Volvo's ongoing safety push. So if for some reason you wanted to get a vehicle that you could get up to over 120, 130, 40 miles an hour, whatever you want to on a track, then Volvos are no longer going to be an option for you. Even the 400 horsepower sporty models are going to be limited to 112. As we've typically seen from Volvo, the value proposition is definitely strong. The LCD instrument cluster is standard, as are LED headlamps, LED fog lamps, the 2-zone automatic climate control, and Android Auto and Apple CarPlay, for some reason an option that is still optional in some luxury entries. Volvo's City Safety System is also standard, but it's worth noting that not all the autonomous active safety stuff is standard. Some of those portions are optional still. That is a little bit different than we see in the Lexus lineup, where we see almost all of their active safety technology standard, including their adaptive cruise control system with aggressive lane centering, etc. Volvo has always marched to a little bit of a different drummer, especially in the United States versus some of their European competition. Some folks have questioned exactly why Volvo does the things that they do, and to those folks out there, I would remind you that America is not Volvo's largest market, as it is for some of the European competition. In fact, The United States sales are not even the second largest market for Volvo. That award goes to China. So the key thing to remember is that when Volvo is going about designing new vehicle platforms, although I'm sure their PR people would say this is not true, quite logically, they're going to be designing things for their home market, for the European market first, for the Chinese market second, for the American market logically third. I think this is one of the key reasons that modern Volvo platforms were designed to only accept their new family of 2-liter inline 4-cylinder engines. They weren't designed to accommodate inline 6s or big V8s or anything along those lines. Because in Europe and in China, bigger displacement engines just aren't as important to your overall market. Volvo competes very happily in their two biggest markets with 2-liter 4-cylinder and smaller engines because most of the competition's vehicles are also available with 2-liter or smaller engines. So as we dive into the competition, definitely keep that in mind. Logically, our first competitor has to be the BMW 3 Series. With this generation of 3 Series, BMW has gone in a slightly different direction than they were going before. In the previous generation of 3 Series, they didn't have an absolute entry-level vehicle to directly compete with the Mercedes-Benz CLA or the Audi A3, or price-wise, the bottom-end trims of Volvo S60. And that's why they offered the smaller, less powerful engine for a long time in the 3 Series with a cut-rate price tag. But that's a little bit different for 2020. Now the 3 Series starts at $40,750, notably more expensive than the S60 because we get more power in that model. And they've also inserted a new base trim to more directly compete with the A3 and the CLA. That's the new 228i Grand Coupe. Now the 228i certainly feels less expensive on the inside, on the outside, versus the Volvo S60, and it's also going to be a little bit smaller overall. It is technically supposed to be a subcompact vehicle, not a compact vehicle. It's supposedly one size category down. So really the 3 Series is the direct S60 competitor. They're about the same overall size. That goes for the exterior dimensions as well as the interior dimensions, interestingly enough. Although I have to admit the Volvo feels a little bit roomier, even though the numbers indicate that they're pretty much the same. Obviously, the big difference out on the road between the 3 Series and the S60 is going to be the way that they drive. The 3 Series does have that strong rear-wheel dynamic, and it is going to be a little bit more playful, a little bit more fun as well. Volvo's plug-in hybrid system is really intriguing here because they're definitely going in a very different direction than the German plug-in hybrid systems, especially the BMW plug-in hybrid. BMW's plug-in hybrid starts at $44,500 for their new 330e, $46,550 if you want all-wheel drive in that model, but it's notably less powerful than the Volvo system and significantly slower 0 to 60. 288 horsepower, not 400, and the way that the system delivers its power just feels quite different. The Volvo system has this incredible kick, a serious sense of urgency, and 0 to 60 times that are more similar to the M340i than the 330e. The BMW system also doesn't give us quite as much range. We get 20 miles of range in that all-wheel drive version versus 25 in the Volvo, and only 25 mpg once the battery has been exhausted versus 30 in the Volvo. Because of the overall hybrid system design in the BMW, they had to shrink the gas tank as well, and that's not something we see in the S60. That means that we get just a 10-gallon gas tank, a little over 10 gallons in the BMW, 290 miles of range versus 510 in the S60 T8. Of course, the S60 T8 has an electric rear axle, and then most of the power is going up front. But that doesn't make it handle quite like Lexus hybrids, because Volvo can deliver significantly more power and torque to the rear axle across a wider variety of speed ranges. The sales proposition on the Volvo is a little bit different, and I think a little bit easier of a sale, because not only do we get the green thing going on, the better fuel economy, the EV range, etc., but we also get a massive helping of improved performance in that T8 version. And that's not exactly what we see in the BMW. And that's why BMW has priced the 330e a little bit lower. After tax credits, it's going to be about the same price overall as the 330i, and performance overall is going to be pretty similar to the 330i as well, not the M340i. That brings us along to the Mercedes-Benz C-Class. The C300 is a very direct competitor to the S60. And of course, like the BMW, in some ways the less expensive Mercedes models are also competitors, like the A-Class and the CLA. Those are Mercedes' smaller front-wheel drive platform vehicles. But the CLA especially is going to feel quite cramped on the inside. The S60 is a little bit larger than the C-Class on the inside, actually, so the C-Class really is the more direct size-wise competitor. The C-Class is feeling a little bit dated here and there, especially on the outside, I think, even though Mercedes has continually refreshed the model. When I say dated, I'm talking about the overall styling, because the parts quality and materials quality in the C-Class is absolutely top-notch. It is definitely very competitive. I do have to say I like the overall styling of the Volvo a little bit better on the inside and on the outside. The outside is a little bit more distinctive than we see in the C-Class. The C-Class front end has never been quite my cup of tea. But the big win for Volvo is, of course, the price tag, because it is significantly less expensive than the Mercedes. Again, the A-Class and the CLA will get up to nearly $60,000 pretty easily. You start adding AMG options on there, and they will get fantastically expensive compared to other subcompact sedans out there. We see the same thing in the C-Class. The C43 is a ton of fun, but the Volvo S60 T8 is going to be significantly less expensive. So much more expensive that you will get an awful lot more content and, of course, more powerful engines in the Volvo than you will see in the corresponding priced Mercedes. We are going to be seeing a C300E coming soon, it looks like. Similar in theme to the BMW 3 Series plug-in hybrid system, so not quite as much oomph as we see in the Volvo, although we are going to be getting 315 horsepower, which is more than we get out of the BMW system. We don't know official EPA numbers yet, but expect it to be in that 20 to 25 miles of range area. And overall fuel economy, I expect, is probably going to be about 25 to 26 miles per gallon when equipped with all-wheel drive, so likely lower than we see in the Volvo plug-in hybrid. The third bestseller in this segment is the Infiniti Q50, a model that some enthusiasts seem to have forgotten. I think that's mainly because Infiniti has been sort of on autopilot for the last few years, and even though the Q50 is a good deal, it's big on the inside, and I also think quite attractive on the outside, not a lot has changed on the Q50 for a while, and the rest of Infiniti's lineup is not quite as exciting, honestly, as the Q50 can be. The big selling points for the Q50 are a relatively low sticker price, the availability of 300 horsepower and 400 horsepower twin-turbo 6-cylinder engines, rear-wheel drive, the amount of fun we get, and of course, relative value. On the downside, the Infiniti infotainment system is a little bit dated, even though it just got a 2020 refresh, which brought us Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. The two-screen setup just needs a little bit more time in the oven. It comes across as a little half-baked, I think. Next up, we have the other option from Germany, the Audi A4. The A4, like the Volvo S60, starts as a front-wheel drive vehicle, and it starts as one of the least powerful luxury vehicles available in America at 188 horsepower. Counterbalancing that low horsepower figure is a relatively low sticker price, however, for the German competition, $37,400, putting it squarely against the S60 T5, but the S60 T5 is more powerful. If you want 248 horsepower, that's going to cost you at least $40,900, and that is a little bit more price in line with where we see the BMW and the Mercedes. But that's going to get you 316 horsepower in the Volvo. Both of these are going to have all-wheel drive. The A4, once you get the 248 horsepower tune, gains all-wheel drive, and the Volvo T6 also has all-wheel drive in the S60. When it comes to overall driving dynamics, the S60 and the A4 are not as far off as you might think. Now, this is not because the A4 is a front-wheel drive vehicle. It does start as a front-wheel drive vehicle, and this has led to some misconceptions. You see, the way that Audi designs their all-wheel drive and front-wheel drive systems in coordination is that they're all longitudinal engines. So the engine is arranged in the A4 in the same way that it is in the Mercedes and the BMW, but in their entry-level models, they've opted, for some reason, whatever that reason is, to go front-wheel drive. They claim it's a little bit more efficient. But when you add all-wheel drive to your A4, regardless of the engine type, most of the power is going to the rear axle, not the front axle. So some people confuse the fact that they start as a front-wheel drive vehicle to mean that the entire lineup is front-wheel biased. That is not true. The S60 is a front-biased all-wheel drive system. So if we're taking a look at the S60 T6 all-wheel drive, for instance, 316 horsepower total. Theoretically, when the clutch pack is locked, 50-50 is the split front to rear, but it will never send more than 50% to the rear axle unless the front axle is spinning. The A4 is the opposite. The A4 system sends the majority to the rear wheels, and it can never theoretically send more power to the front wheels in this iteration, unless it has a different differential in the center, than about 50% unless the rear wheel slips. So the A4 definitely has a rear power bias. But because of the position of the engine, it has a very similar weight bias to the S60, so it is much front heavier than some of the other European options. And that's sometimes where people get things a little bit confused. If I were shopping for an entry in this segment simply on overall driving feel out on the road, then it would be something along the lines of the Stelvio. I really liked the new Mercedes-Benz C300 as well. It's very powerful for an entry-level engine. And then, of course, we have the BMW 3 Series, the classic benchmark in this segment as well. The A4 is generally not going to be on that list, neither would the S60 because of their different driving dynamics. That's again not to say that they handle poorly, they just handle a little bit differently. They have a different feel out on the road. The bottom line, however, in the segment for the S60 is that there are a ton of competitive entries here. And I really like the fact that Volvo has gone in a slightly different direction, because most manufacturers seem to be chasing that same thing that BMW and Mercedes and Alfa Romeo and Cadillac are chasing. They're after that rear-wheel drive dynamic, they're trying to be as sporty as possible, etc. And it's refreshing to find an option that isn't trying to be BMW Me Too. Volvo is certainly not trying to emulate what BMW is doing in the 3 Series. If I were shopping in this segment right now with my own money, I would generally lean towards the S60 T8 because I like the way the hybrid system works. I like the EV range, I like the power, and I like that it is a little bit different as well, while having very few compromises. Definitely excellent fuel economy for the power in that model. But I have to admit that I also lean a little bit towards the new Mercedes C300. That base engine in the C300 is absolutely excellent for 2020. And again, there are a ton of great options out there. The Jaguar XE is absolutely gorgeous. The A4 has that incredible LCD instrument cluster. It's going to be really, really difficult to pick an option in this segment. But again, I think I lean generally towards the S60 primarily because of the T8 plug-in hybrid system. Let me know what you think about all that down there in the comment section below. Be sure and find us over at facebook.com/AlexNautos. Check out the merch link down there. You can buy t-shirts right like this one down there. Head over to instagram.com/AlexNautos to find the lighter side of things here as well. I'll see all of you later.